It was February 12, 1973, at the Las Vegas Hilton. More than 4,000 people filled the showroom when a trembling voice pierced through the applause. A single mother, clutching her seat, made a request no one expected. Elvis stopped mid-movement, and what followed left the room dead silent. The orchestra had just finished a blistering run of Proud Mary, brass. Notes still hung in the air as Elvis turned, flashing a smile that made the Hilton showroom erupt again. Stagehands knew the pattern. The king would sip from his water glass, nod to conductor Joe Gueccio, and slide seamlessly into the next number. The pace of the Vegas shows was a machine, every cue rehearsed, every beat expected. But on February 12, 1973, something cracked the rhythm. It was faint at first, so small against the swell of applause that most thought they'd imagined it. Then it rose, trembling, shaky as though pulled up from deep inside. A woman's voice, fragile but determined. "Mr. Presley, please, for my little boy." The crowd stiffened. Tables that had buzzed with chatter only moments earlier froze mid-sentence. Glasses were set down without a clink. Somewhere in the middle rose a single mother named Mary Thompson, clutched her scarf against her chest. Her hands shook. Her lips quivered as if each syllable cost her everything. Security guards near the aisles exchanged looks. Disruptions weren't uncommon in Vegas, but this one sounded different to neither heckle nor drunken shout. One guard leaned toward the stage, waiting for a signal. Elvis paused mid-step, one hand still holding the microphone stand. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in concentration. The smile faded. He tilted his head, trying to catch the words above the murmurs. The band hesitated, instruments in a half-rest, half-ready stance. Joe Gueccio's baton wavered. Should they push forward or hold back? "Mr. Presley." Mary's voice cracked again. "For my little boy." It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even loud. But something in the way it trembled carried further than the brass ever could. What kind of courage does it take to raise your voice in front of 4,200 strangers? And what kind of desperation sits beneath a plea like that? The audience leaned in. Some frowned, irritated. They had paid to see Elvis, not to share the spotlight with a stranger. Others, softer at heart, looked toward Mary, sensing that her words carried a weight none of them yet understood. Elvis finally spoke, his voice lower, steady. "What was that, honey?" The spotlight shifted just enough that Mary's face caught a shimmer of gold. She swallowed hard. "He's sick," she said, barely audible. "Would you sing for him?" The words wobbled like porcelain. Gasps rustled through the room. A request like that in a Vegas showroom, where timing was king and the set list sacred, was unheard of. Some fans murmured, "Sit down." Others whispered, "Let him answer." One moment before, it had been a routine show. Now, the air itself felt fragile. Elvis gripped the microphone tighter. His eyes didn't leave Mary's. Something in his gaze shifted from performer to man. The seconds stretched. The tension wasn't just about music anymore. It was about whether compassion could pierce through the machinery of stardom. Would the king risk breaking his rhythm for one mother's trembling voice? Or would silence swallow the plea, leaving only regret in its place? Backstage, the walls seemed to breathe with the echo of screams and applause. Elvis leaned against a mirror spotted with fingerprints and stage dust, his reflection fractured by bulbs that buzzed with tired light. His jumpsuit, white and heavy with rhinestones, shimmered even in the dimness. To the fans outside, he was a diamond, unbreakable. But alone in that room, he was just a man with a body that kept betraying him. The Hilton residency had begun as a triumph, a king reclaiming his throne. But night after night, the marathon shows grew longer. 2 hours, Colonel Parker would say, clapping him on the back. Give them their money's worth. Elvis nodded, always nodding, because saying no felt like failure. The crowd wanted everything, and he could not bear to disappoint. But his body whispered what he refused to hear. A burning tightness in his chest, the way his hands trembled when he signed autographs, the dizzy fog that sometimes clouded his vision mid-song. He laughed it off with his band, just a little tired. Fellas, but inside, he wondered if the music itself was draining him, pulling him thinner each night. The pills were supposed to help. First to sleep, then to wake, then to keep him steady through the long hours. Small bottles rattled in his dressing case like hidden rocks. They dulled the edges of his exhaustion, but they also painted his days in strange colors, bright mornings that blurred into heavy afternoons, and nights that stretched like tunnels. The audience never saw the strain. On stage, he masked it with the tilt of his head, the curve of a smile, the effortless drawl between songs. But there were moments when the mask cracked. A missed lyric, a pause held just too long. The sweet inspirations, his backing singers, would glance at each other, sensing something off. Even the fans, lost in their own adoration, sometimes felt a flicker of unease. And still, he pushed harder. The Hilton lights demanded it. The Colonel demanded it. His own pride demanded it. "You're the king, baby," a stagehand once whispered before a show, adjusting Elvis's cape. Elvis gave him a tired grin. A king, but kings, too, have breaking points. Outside, Las Vegas never slept. Neon bled into the desert sky, casinos hummed, fortunes rose and crumbled in an instant. Inside, Elvis Presley fought a quieter battle, the weight of expectation versus the limits of flesh. Every cheer was fuel, but also a chain. Every encore was both victory and punishment. The strain was invisible to most, but it was there, threading through the rhinestones, stitched into the fabric of every performance. The king was burning bright, but the fire came at a cost. And though the crowd roared louder each night, some part of Elvis knew, deep in the tired bones beneath the glitter, that the music was consuming him as much as it was exalting him. The smile never faded, but behind it, the cracks had begun to spread. The stage was his kingdom, yet Elvis never saw himself as untouchable. For all the glitter stitched into his cape, the man inside it still carried the heart of a boy from Tupelo, raised on hymns and handshakes. That heart revealed itself in flashes, moments when the music paused, and the man behind the legend leaned forward, reaching for his people. One evening in August, the Hilton showroom swelled with its usual electricity. The orchestra struck the opening chords of Love Me Tender, and the crowd melted, as it always did. Fans pressed toward the edge of the stage, arms outstretched, roses and scarves trembling in their hands. Security tried to hold them back, but Elvis only smiled. He walked to the lip of the stage, knelt, and began pressing kisses to foreheads, cheeks, even trembling hands. Some cried, some fainted. One woman whispered, "Bless you," and he whispered it back, as though she were the star and he the pilgrim. Another night. A child no older than 10 was lifted onto the stage by her mother, tears streaming down her small face. The show slowed. Elvis bent down, wiped her cheeks with the edge of his sleeve, and placed the scarf around her neck. "Don't cry, honey. he said softly into the mic, his voice carrying through the hushed room. Tonight's all right. The band waited, the crowd waited, the city of Las Vegas itself seemed to pause. Then the girls smiled, and the king stood, launching into the next verse, as if the moment had been written into the song all along. He had a way of breaking the barrier between star and spectator. Fans weren't just an audience. They were companions in his story. Sometimes he would stop, mid-song, pointing at someone laughing too hard in the back row. "I see you," he'd chuckle, and the room would erupt, every stranger feeling suddenly noticed. Other times, he'd slip into gospel tunes, unplanned, closing his eyes, as if pulling everyone into a quiet chapel, far from the neon madness outside. For those few minutes, the casino walls dissolved. The fans weren't gamblers, or tourists, or strangers anymore. They were a congregation, and Elvis was both preacher and fellow believer, holding their hearts in the palm of his hand. These moments mattered because they revealed a truth the rhinestones couldn't cover. Elvis needed his fans as much as they needed him. Each scarf handed out, each hand clasped, was not just a gesture, but a tether, pulling him back to the humanity that fame threatened to erase. Behind the sweat and the strain, behind the flashing bulbs and endless encores, lived a man desperate to stay connected, desperate to love and be loved in return. When the show ended and the lights dimmed, those moments lingered. Fans carried them home like secret treasures, stories they would tell their children, then their grandchildren. And Elvis carried them, too tucked away in the tired corners of his soul. Reminders that even when the music drained him, compassion could fill him back up. In the Hilton showroom, amid the smoke and applause, the king of rock and roll reminded the world that the greatest crown a man could wear was kindness. It was a late summer night, and the Hilton showroom pulsed with restless energy. The orchestra tuned low, the backup singers swayed, and the air carried the perfume of champagne and cigarette smoke. Elvis stepped into the spotlight, cape catching the glow, his face shining with both sweat and anticipation. The crowd leaned forward as one. He began with power. "You gave me a mountain," filled the room, his voice climbing through sorrow and triumph. Each note was a plea, each pause a confession. The Hilton's walls, lined with velvet and gold trim, seemed too small for the sound. People closed their eyes, clasped hands, swayed, caught in something larger than a concert. But then it happened. Mid-verse his throat tightened. The line slipped, cracked. His hand gripped the microphone stand, knuckles pale under the lights. For a heartbeat, silence cut through the music. The orchestra froze, the singers exchanged glances. A missed lyric, a falter in the king's voice, unthinkable. The audience gasped, then hushed. Every eye fixed on him. It could have been a disaster, a fracture in the myth. Instead, Elvis raised his hand, smiled faintly, and whispered into the mic, "Lord, help me through this one." The words weren't part of the script. They weren't meant for applause, but the room erupted, a tidal wave of compassion. Strangers shouted, "We love you, Elvis." Others stood, clapping, their cheers lifting him higher than any note could. For once, he wasn't the invincible king. He was human, and that was enough. Tears glistened on cheeks across the showroom. Women pressed scarves to their eyes. Men wiped at their faces in secret. A gospel hush fell over the hall, the kind of stillness that comes before prayer. And in that stillness, Elvis straightened. He didn't retreat from the broken moment. He embraced it. With a trembling breath, he began again. The band followed, tentative at first, then stronger. His voice carried the crack, carried the pain, but now it rang truer than before. No rhinestone, no spotlight, no crown could compete with the naked honesty of that sound. He wasn't just singing, he was offering his soul. When the final note soared, it was ragged and raw, but it shook the room. The audience leapt to their feet. The applause wasn't polite, it was thunder, a storm of gratitude. They weren't cheering the flawless king of rock and roll. They were cheering the man who dared to falter, dared to show them his wounds. Backstage later, some would whisper about the slip. The colonel might grumble about control. But for those who had been in that room, it was the truest performance of his life. They hadn't just seen a star. They had witnessed a man wrestling with his own limits, refusing to surrender, asking for help in front of thousands, and finding redemption in their response. That night, Elvis didn't just wear the crown. He earned it all over again, not with perfection, but with vulnerability. The Hilton showroom emptied slowly that night, like pilgrims leaving a holy site. People clutched ticket stubs, lipstick-stained napkins, and scarves brushed by his hand. They didn't just walk out talking about the set list or the sparkle of his cape. They whispered about the moment he faltered and the way he rose in the days that followed. Bootleg tapes circulated, passed hand to hand, the crack in his voice preserved alongside the plea, "Lord, help me through this one." Far from tarnishing his image, it deepened it. Those who listened swore they heard more than a singer struggling. They heard a man brave enough to ask for strength in front of strangers, and in doing so, give them permission to be vulnerable too. Reporters wrote small pieces. Elvis show turned spiritual, one clipping declared, tucked into the corner of a Las Vegas entertainment column. A Hilton usher, Rosa Delgado, later said, "I'd seen hundreds of shows. That was the only night I forgot to do my job. I just cried with everyone else." Her words became part of the folklore. Quoted in fan clubs for decades, fans returned home and told their families. Some said the moment inspired them to face addictions, to forgive, to let themselves stumble without shame. A single mother from Reno, the same one whose trembling voice had sparked the night, wrote in a letter years later, "He didn't just sing for me. He showed me I wasn't weak for asking help. That saved me." That was the legacy. Not a flawless performance, but a fragile one that carried more power than perfection ever could. The man who once seemed larger than life became a mirror, showing people that cracks don't destroy the vessel. Sometimes they let the light shine through. Looking back, it's tempting to focus only on the glitter, the jumpsuits, the records, the sold-out crowds. But ask anyone who was in that Hilton room in the summer of 1974, and they won't tell you about rhinestones. They'll tell you about silence, a broken note, and an audience that became a choir of compassion. Isn't that the truest measure of greatness? Not how high a person stands above the crowd, but how deeply they connect when they stumble into the crowd's arms. Elvis left Las Vegas with more than applause that night. He carried the invisible weight of thousands who, for a few minutes, gave him back the strength he'd given them through years of music. And in doing so, he reminded the world that legends aren't made from marble. They're made from flesh, from cracks, from courage. So when you hear the recordings and the voice wavers, don't wince. Lean in. That tremble is the heartbeat of a man reminding us that imperfection is not failure. It's humanity. And humanity shared openly is unforgettable. The stage lights dimmed, but the weight of the moment lingered long after the curtains drew. Fans shuffled toward the exits in hushed tones as though they had witnessed something sacred. They had not merely attended another Vegas show. They had lived through a reminder of why music matters at all. For Mary Thompson, the night became more than a memory. Years later, when her son grew strong again, she told him the story of how Elvis had stopped an entire showroom for him. She kept the scarf she clutched that night folded in a cedar chest, a relic not of celebrity, but of compassion offered when it was least expected. For Elvis, the moment proved something too. He had sung in front of presidents. He had sold millions of records. But here he found that true greatness came not in spectacle, but in listening. By pausing for one trembling voice, he gave dignity to thousands who carried their own silent burdens. And for everyone else, the 4,200 who gasped, cried, and then sang together, the memory became a moral etched into their lives. That even the briefest choice to acknowledge another's pain can ripple outward for decades. It was not the roar of guitars or the flash of rhinestones that echoed longest from that night. It was the fragile strength of a song offered like a prayer. Elvis didn't just perform, he reminded the world that music, at its truest, is not entertainment. It is connection. And that connection, carried from mother to child, from singer to crowd, became a weight heavier than fame, yet lighter than hope. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in the quiet power of compassion. Were you ever in a room where music changed everything? Tell us in the comments, and keep exploring more stories that remind us why legends never truly fade.